Okay, so I think we're going to move on to the next panel. So I think Madeline was going to start by introducing them.
Yeah, so I just wanted to say that to end our conference today, we have an awesome panel lined up. Catherine is just going to mention again the names of our speakers, and then she'll get started with them.
Yeah, so with us today, we have Jeff Kohrman, Andy Steingruebl, and Steve Gentry, and then we have David Spark moderating with the questions. Again, the audience is definitely welcome to ask questions. I know we have some in the Q&A already. So yeah, take it away.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Catherine and Madeline, for running all this. My name is David Spark. I am the producer of the CISO series. It is the Cybersecurity Media channel. And let me introduce all our guests. There is Jeff Kohrman, who's the CEO at eCISO. So just put the letter E in front of CISO and you get this company. Andy Steingruebl is also joining us. And Andy has actually been a guest on my podcast before. He is the CISO at Pinterest. And also we have Steve Gentry, who is the former CISO at Workfront. Gentlemen, thank you so much. And thank you, everybody else. Please, if you've got questions, we're going to field them as many as we can. I've noticed a bunch of questions have come in already that aren't necessarily on topic, but I think our panel can handle them regardless, because our topic is about getting buy-in for security. And so let's just talk about, I want to know what you sort of define buy-in to be, because I'm interested to know like what level you're expecting and like what's hopeful and what is, like, oh, we got to do better than that kind of a thing. So let me start with you, Jeff. What do you define buy-in in cybersecurity to be?
I actually hate this topic, David.
Really? Hold on. Would you organize this?
Yeah. And so this is one of those things where it's like getting commitment for security is such a multifaceted thing, and security in general is so vague and broad that there's no way that you can get 100% commitment from everyone in the company, and you don't really need to, I don't think. And so I think it comes down to what are we actually trying to achieve? What do we want to accomplish, and what level of security do we want our peers to commit to? And is that even the right question to ask? Mm-hmm. So I start thinking about, when I look at getting better commitment to security, I want to start measuring what my commitment is already, and is that enough?
Good point.
And so I'll go ahead.
Let me take this to Andy. Andy, when I first met you, you had just started at Pinterest. So you probably walked into something for which there was a certain level of cybersecurity commitment or buy-in, if you will. And was it at a satisfactory level? And what did you want to? I'm assuming everyone wants it to be more. So what were you like kind of walking into, not just in the whole cybersecurity plan, but just in terms of commitment level buy-in from the high level all down to the employees? Where were you and where did you want to bring it?
Sure. It's funny. I've been there just over a year and a half. And so like the interviews I did in taking the job are still kind of fresh in my mind, in which I had exactly this conversation with the executives of the company, the CEO, the general counsel, the CFO, and so on. And I think what the company wanted was to take security seriously, but not knowing what that was. So they already had a security team, and a very good security team. I inherited an awesome program, but it was like, I've worked in regulated areas and so on. So it was come in and provide a little bit more of that. Hey, the company's going to go public. At the time, I didn't know how quickly. And so on. And so it was tell us how should we measure it? What is the right level? We're not experts, the rest of the executive team. So what's the right level of security we should be going for? Help us, coach us, guide us through, let's have conversations and make that decision together on what we think the right level of security is, and then agree to the right level of resourcing and other commitments across the company from a planning, execution, and so on perspective to actually deliver on that. So it's setting a target, and then so like the buy-in is like set a target. The company has to agree to that, and then you have to figure out, do you have the right resources, organizational behaviors, and so on to achieve that? And if you don't, what do you need to do that? And I've been pretty lucky.
I'm thinking the way you described that sounds pretty ideal.
Yeah.
What you got walked in, Steve. I'm wondering if you have a different take than either Jeff or Andy here with regards to the concept of buy-in and like how you define it. And, you know, maybe there's a worst, I mean, Andy sound like a best case scenario in terms of we're open to what you tell us. What do you say, Steve?
Yeah, I actually, it's been interesting with different executive teams. So I actually just signed an offer letter for my next CISO gig this morning. So I went through all the interview process. I'm talking to them about the buy-ins and going how we go through this process. And I was down to a couple of different companies, and the executive teams had very different approaches. One of them was treating it like, well, you're the security guy, so fantastic, just go do your security thing. We want you to just do your security stuff. And it kept coming back to just do your security stuff. The company that I signed the offer letter with was meeting with the CEO. He's like, fantastic. Here's how I expect you to make an impact in the company. I don't know the security stuff as well as you do, so I need you to help us, guide us, like what Andy was talking about. Like I had that very similar experience with this CEO, but he's also said, and I need you to not just be the security guy. He's like, you've said one thing during the interview process, Gentry, that I want you to stick with. He's like, you said you want to be a business leader who runs security, not a security leader inside of a business. He's like,
Right.
And that's the approach I need you to be. I need you to impact everywhere across the board, because that's how companies work. And that's how you get buy-in. You have to make sure that you're not putting security above everything else. You're making sure that you find balance and prioritization among the things that you're doing, and realize that everybody else,
because security is just one of multiple risks at a company.
Exactly. It's one cog in the watch. And so you've got to make sure you're balancing it with everything else and realizing people have their own priorities to work with.
All right, I got a question from the audience here, and this is actually something we've talked about on our podcasts before. It's written this way: on getting buy-in, be honest. How often do you approach things with a fear, uncertainty, doubt approach, and how often do you take a positive opportunity approach? Now, I know universally CISOs hate FUD, but I can't imagine you can't ignore the fact that there are dangers and you have to explain that. So how I can't imagine there's zero FUD. I know you wouldn't want to use that term, but I can't imagine there's zero when you're communicating about using cybersecurity. Jeff, what do you think?
You know, I think security in general is invokes so many primal instincts. You know, there's that fear for your livelihood, that fear of the unknown, and I think as business leaders who run security, I love that. I'm going to steal that, Steve. I think as we look at, you know, what types of concerns are there and what types of risks there are inside of our businesses, we really need to think more about, you know, how are we articulating those risks so that people don't feel anxious. We don't want to be the people that are causing anxiety or fear. We want to lay out the risks and explain them so that people don't feel worried about it when they get that information in order to make.
So okay, so can you give me an example? This is a good thing. There is something that if you read it in the news, it would cause automatic anxiety. How do you approach someone like, okay, you may have seen this. Here's what it is. Here's why I'm going to mitigate it. Like, how do you sort of approach that?
Yeah. So I mean, we can take the pandemic as a perfect example.
Mm-hmm.
In one of the companies I started working with in the beginning of this year, we started in January, and you know, we realized that as a global organization, they needed to be prepared for certain operational incidents. So the first thing we started to do was look at their business continuity plans and their pandemic response plans, which turned out to be surprisingly timely. But that's a lot of what I focused my career on, is helping companies be sustainable. And so looking at what their needs were from a pandemic perspective, you know, talking about the Spanish flu, and you know, going through all of these very hyperbolic situations, we realized that, you know, they had a lot of concerns about unknowns, and we found that other employees had personal anxieties about illness, about mental health, and so we started to identify the issues as business needs rather than directly risks, things that we need to continue to operate at a cultural level as well as a functional and operational level. And what we ended up doing was introducing additional counseling services and adding supplemental benefits to our employees' compensation packages, so that they didn't feel worried when the pandemic hit, because we already had that plan in place.
Mm-hmm. I'm gonna switch the question here. Oh, Steve, you want to say something?
Go ahead. Just one comment. I'll keep it brief on this. You got the chicken little syndrome in many CISOs, where the sky is always falling, and they lead with the FUD. Even though we hate FUD, they lead with it like, "Hey, we're going to get breached. We're going to get breached." Like, well, great. A lot of companies gotten breached. But I remember after the Capital One security breach, having that conversation and sitting down with our CEO and CTO and saying, "Hey, here's, we're all in AWS and GCP. We've got the same risk going on if we're not protecting. Here's the things that we have in place. Here's some unknowns or areas that we can do better." And it focus on here's what we're already doing to highlight we've got some positive things that are taking place, and then here's the risk that we have that still exists, and here's where we can improve upon it. But we have to decide if we're willing to spend the money to minimize or mitigate that risk, or as a company, are we okay with accepting it? And so
I'm interested to know, when you speak to security leaders, in that very same comment, and I'm interested in your take on this, Andy, as well, when you say, because you're spelling it out for them. I'm the security leader. I'm going to spell it out. Here's where there's risk. Here's where we're mitigating the risk. To mitigate this risk, it's going to cost this. How do the other business leaders, in terms of grokking that information and then spit back to you, okay, this is what we want to do, don't want to do, and are they accepting of the way you deliver it?
Yeah, to Steve's point, I've been doing this long enough that I remember there didn't used to be a lot of incidents, or they were few and far between in the news. And
now they're daily.
You didn't have a lot to rely on. And so most of the scenarios you came up with seemed like science fiction, and they were fear based, because it was, hey, that would never happen. Who'd ever think of that? Now, the good or bad thing about doing my job, or our jobs as CISOs, is that there are enough incidents out there that you can have a more continuous dialogue with people across the company on, hey, this thing happened to this company. Pick Capital One, pick Twitter and their incident, and you say, what do we know about it? How, based on the things that happened, are we feeling pretty good? Are we feeling not okay? And where are we focused, and what should we do about it? And when there's actual concrete examples you can point to, and if you're careful or clever, you pick the ones where sometimes you're actually totally buttoned up and everybody can feel good that you've got some great stuff in place. And other times you can point to an example where, hey, we're not great, and here's what we're doing about it, and I'll come to you if I need your support in order to do those things. So having some balance there.
And quickly, among all three of you, do you use, because I've heard other CISOs do this, do you use recent breaches, hacks, to form your own tabletop exercise? It's like, hey, let's see how we would handle this. Do you all do that? Yes?
Yeah, part of that. And also it's, I run every other month, have a data protection steering committee where it's members of the executive staff that are part of that, and we discuss. And so recent events get discussed in those. And I use that as part of the education process, because one of our key jobs is information security or security professionals is to be educators. So using those to drive tabletops as well as discussions with the data protection steering committee among the execs.
All right, I'm gonna veer the discussion a little bit. I know we have a lot of high school students that are listening right now, and a question came in, and I know there was some answers given in text, but I'm going to sort of ever so slightly edit it. I know when a lot of you were in high school, there wasn't much of anything to do with cybersecurity. So imagine the high school version of you was what is modern day cybersecurity today. And the question is, with all the experience you have now, what is the thing, if you had one piece of knowledge about cybersecurity as a high school student, because often we don't think about this at all, what is the one piece of knowledge about cybersecurity you wish you knew at that time that would set you up just in terms of being better professionally, whether you're in cybersecurity or not? But what would be that one thing? Jeff, I'll ask you first.
What would I want to know as high school Jeff?
High school Jeff. And again, assume that the landscape when you're in high school of cybersecurity looks like what it is today.
Well, I mean, David, I didn't go to high school, so that kind of changes things for me. I'm not entirely sure what what kind of an experience anybody else had anyway.
Jeff goes into high school next year. This is why he's.
Oh yeah.
Oh, okay, so well, hopefully you know something now, Jeff.
So I mean, really, I think that if I could tell myself one thing, it's that security is not just technical. You know, there's so much that's more interesting on the people side of things, and people are really where the hard problems come into play. You can always solve technical issues. You can always find new vulnerabilities. You can always, you know, get the next bug bounty. But to really have an impact, you have to understand how security fits into the broader context of the business.
All right, good point. All right, Andy, what high school version of you, what do you wish that you knew?
You know, I think Jeff's right that that being successful is more than just being technical. It's funny. One of the best bits of career advice I ever got was from another CISO who used to be my boss, and it was, you know, you have to decide: do you want to be right or do you want to have impact? And you know, a lot of us who are technically backgrounded always want to have the right answer, but that's not always the key to getting stuff done and influencing people. You know, I can count, I don't even need the fingers on one hand to count the number of times somebody was happy when I said, I told you so, when I was right about something. In fact, you know, has anybody ever said that? You know, thanks, you were right. I'm so glad you put it back. Nobody's ever said that. So, no. You know, it's a little bit of an ego check, and that's hard. It was really hard for me when I was younger on working on the personal interaction aspects of stuff and doing things collaboratively, rather than just trying to have the technically right answer. But my advice still stands, I think, of be awesome at one or two things, whether that's being a great software engineer or being really great with a specific operating system and really understanding the guts of it. Be technically awesome at one or two things to have a real solid underpinning and foundation for yourself to then branch out, but be truly excellent at one or two things.
I agree with that. You want to be known as the absolute expert in that, where everyone's like, oh, you got to talk to Andy about this. He's the one to talk to about this. I agree. Steve, last for you, the one thing you could tell the high school version of you.
Yeah, so my tagline on my LinkedIn profile is security is not about technology. So going off of what Jeff and Andy have already said, if I was going to be able to go back and teach myself something that, having run my own consulting firm for 10 years in a previous life, you kind of build up an ego. One thing I wish I would have learned earlier in my career is to leave the ego at the door. Mm-hmm. Not that you can't be knowledgeable, be that expert in pieces, but learn that you're never going to be the smartest person in the room. There's always going to be smarter people, and you need to make sure you're listening to what they say. And so if you leave the ego at the door, not that you can't be confident, but leave it outside, go in there being willing to learn what other people have to say, so you're sharing information and working and collaborating with them and not coming in to tell people they're right, because, again, nobody wants to be told, I told you so.
You know what? And let me add to that. And I my version of that answer is, and this is tough for a high school student to hear, because in high school you play this game a lot, and that's a comparison game. There's someone better looking, smarter, richer, wealthier, you know, more skilled, more athletic than me at this. You could always find that person. That person exists. Just let everyone know there is a person that's better, probably in your school, at all of those things. But like you say, ego check is you have to be satisfied with what you're learning, what you're doing, and recognize that there's always someone better. And don't even play the comparison game, because you always lose. And it's just a way like that. All right, let's move back into our discussion. We only have about 10 minutes left. Let's go to
do you mind if I jump? Do you mind?
Go jump in, Jeff.
Yeah, one of the things you said I thought was really interesting. Don't play the comparison game. I think when Andy, Steve, you may have more experience around this than I do, but when you jump into a company and you adopt a program, a lot of the time I've been asked to compare it to my peers and to compare the status of our current security program to other competitors. And, you know, I think that still stands. I'm curious to get to hear other people's take on it. But
there can be a healthy way of doing that. I think there's a healthy version of jealousy. Steve, yes?
Yeah, I was going to say industry benchmarking has its place because
Yes.
you are looking for some comparison level that you're doing for your program, not yourselves as individuals. And that's what you've got to like, you can't take it as a personal that, oh, my security program sucks compared to my peers. They've got all this money. It's like, no. If you're focused on you're building the right program for the business that you're in because you've been meeting with the executive team, you know what the risk appetite is because you know what the business objectives are, that's fantastic. You know what your program is, but it's good to also be able to have some comparison for the industry because I believe in running what I call a good enough +1 security program.
Mm-hmm.
Good enough to match what your competitors are doing, and then those areas where you want to be a market differentiator, you do the +1. On things like
that's a good take.
Customer data, so for the last 10.5 years, I've worked for SaaS companies. Customer data is not one of those places where you do good enough. That's where you have the +1 or the +12. You want to have your A+ grade on that type of program. But for a lot of stuff, you just need to do good enough. And if you can have that comparison as you're talking to the executive team of this is why I want to spend money, this is where we're going to be compared against the marketplace, that's where it has its value. But if you're using it to say, hey, I need 20 more headcount because, oh, Jason Chan over at Netflix has got so many more people than I do. It's like, well, you're not even on the same company level. Stop using that as a comparison.
But here, let me ask you this, Andy, that one of the kind of interesting things I always find fascinating about cybersecurity is cybersecurity leaders that work for directly competitive companies need each other. You know, like I got to assume that you talk to other cybersecurity leaders at other social networks. You are technically competitive and businesses, but your problems and their problems are very similar. And you can share knowledge among each other. Yes. I mean, does that happen?
Sure, though I think my comms and marketing team would be grumpy with me if I didn't say we're not a social media company because of how we work and what the platform's about. But that said, like you're right, like a large group of us get together and mostly share on all the information. And I'm big on analogies.
And you're getting together with organizations that are directly competitive to you.
Yes. Because we here's a the old joke is like the two people are being chased by the bear and the one bends down to tie his shoes and he's like, you're never going to outrun the bear, and he says, I just need to outrun you. I don't need to outrun the bear. But that's not how we operate in cybersecurity.
Right.
Instead, we want to deny the bear or the attacker their next meal and all escape. And so we all cooperate on a whole bunch of things to starve the attackers, rather than have the least secure person get attacked, and so on. So like that's been the mantra for maybe 10 or 15 years of how almost all CISOs I know operate, is sharing and collaborating on stuff.
Would you find that, and ask the others, when you collaborate specifically with direct competitors or people in very similar industries to you, is that the best way that you build your security program?
You'd be surprised though how many like tips, tricks, other things I get from just a variety of other companies. Like Steve pointed out Netflix. Like they've built some really cool tools.
Yes.
And so on. Dropbox has built some really cool tools and open source some things, and so did Lyft and so did Uber and so on. Regardless of what you think of various companies, what they do, their business, whatever, there's quite a number of great security teams out there, and you learn something awesome from all the really good security teams that exist in the world. And it's not just by sector and so on. I think that, you learn a lot on certain defensive techniques based on similar attacks, but on core security principles and so on, it's a pretty big world out there, and you can learn or take good things from tons of places.
Going off of what Andy said earlier about specializing, all of us have our areas. Like I started coming in through Novell, working as a directory engineer at Novell, and that's how I got into identity management projects. And that's some identity and access management was my area of expertise when I first started. a lot of us came through different methods, so people all have their different focuses. There's also so many security vendors out there. I have found some really cool security vendors through my peers who have said, oh, have you guys heard about this? I can't keep track of everybody, but I hear these different things and just some of the cool things that other people are able to accomplish. And so again, checking your ego at the door with everyone else and being able to go, hey, there's so much for me to learn, and having that peer group. I have learned some amazing things, and I think my programs have benefited just from the peer group connections I've made.
All right, so I don't know if we're stopping at 25 minutes past the hour or 30 minutes past the hour, but I want to, Jeff, are we stopping at 25 minutes or 30 minutes past the hour? Because I'm
30 minutes, I believe.
30 minutes. Okay. So let me ask this now, just in case we don't have enough time for it. Our audience, as I understand, we have high school students listening, and also some entrepreneurs, some small businesses listening. And I'm going to make this a very open question that I ask, similar to the high school question. What is the organization that yet doesn't have a CISO, maybe no security people, just IT people? How would you suggest they start building out and thinking about building out their security program? I'll start with you, Jeff.
That's a great question. I think it goes back to timing for me. I just got back from a camping trip, and we were out in the middle of the woods, in the middle of nowhere, and all of a sudden we hear these cattle running through the woods, trampling branches, breaking sticks, splashing and crashing through the stream, and then running and sniffing all around our tent. And if I decided in the middle of all of that to stand up and try and scare them away, I would have found myself inches away from a couple dozen angry cattle and their calves, and me and my family on the other side of a thin piece of fabric. That's not really the situation I want to put myself in. So when I think about a security program and when to build that, we have to start having the conversations around, what does security mean to my business? Is this something that's aligned with the values of our company? And if not, maybe we need to readjust some of those values. Is this something that we're prepared technically and organizationally to implement? But I think the real question in my mind is, are we genuinely prepared to do this? Is this something that we can commit to? And are we trying to do it because we want to make sales? Are we trying to do this because it'll make us a strategic market advantage? And try and figure out all of the different components so that you can define, to Steve's point, what is good enough plus one?
Yeah, good point. So let me throw this to you, Steve. Steve, I got a new company, maybe one IT person, potentially none. Maybe I do everything in the cloud and I don't have any IT staff whatsoever. Well, how would I be thinking about building out a security program?
Funny you should mention that. Yeah, in going into the organization I'm going in now, I've got a very junior team. It's a very small team of 3 people at this point in time. So it's going in, and yes, they exist, but they're all so junior that it's, what are we trying to accomplish? So again, it goes back to understanding the company's business objectives, and then it's doing that assessment. If you're an entrepreneur and you don't have a security team and you don't have a security person, it's going back and reaching out to your network and finding maybe an advisor who you can run some questions past or can guide you through the process. If you've got a new person in house, it's allowing them the opportunity to ask questions. I mean, you got 2 ears and 1 mouth. Use them proportionally in the security world to go ask and listen. Find out where their risks are, find out what is trying to be accomplished in the business, and then plan small chunks. Get your early wins in, but do them in small chunks instead of trying to take on you'll go back to the idiom, try and boil the ocean. Just eat the elephant one bite at a time and go from there.
And the advice that often my co-host Mike Johnson says is look at the CIS top 20 and go in order, pretty much. It's often a good tip. I'm going to close with you on this question, Andy. Similar, it's a very small green company, no security experience. How did they begin sort of that journey?
Sure, and I think, I mean, Mike's advice is pretty good there. I'll say that there's some set of, and I guess I've been doing security since my first full-time job, which was being a Unix system administrator at a university. And, you know, we joked, I mean, the insiders were the attackers. They were trying to get extra CPU cycles and more disk storage and places to store pirated games and, you know, run hacking tools and other stuff.
Which,
and
by the way, that's what I heard, that the very first password hacks were for that reason, just to get more time on the shared server.
Oh, yeah. You know, hack your friends, etc. But so security was a huge portion of my job as a sysadmin, and so I didn't ever look at it as a totally different discipline. It was just part of doing my job in terms of taking care of things. And so if you think about, like, hey, if you're not applying patches to your systems, then you're probably going to have bugs that crop up, both security bugs and just things where the thing crashes or corrupts data or something. So quite a number of those CIS controls, and that's a good way to structure it, are things that help you for security and help you for stability and availability and so on, and things you should just be doing anyway. And so I tend to look at pick the first level of things that your existing staff, without having to be security experts, can make as part of just their regular job. It's everybody's job anyway, so make sure that you're doing those things. CIS is all about, like, apply defaults, change default passwords, etc. Oh yeah, that's a security thing, but it's part of the, like, the person to do that is the person who's setting up the desktop computers and setting a password policy or setting screen locks or things like that. That's all those teams' jobs in the first place. It's not a dedicated security person's job to come do that. So it's start with those things that are already other people's jobs. Like, pick the CIS as an organizing principle and so on, but pick the things that you already have teams and people responsible for and make those things part of their job as a way to get started, rather than trying to have a bunch of dedicated security people. I think is a way more effective thing for a smaller company.
Excellent point. And by the way, an excellent point to close out on, because we are out of time right now. I want to thank everyone on my panel. That was the last person speaking. That was Andy Steingruebl, who's the CISO of Pinterest. Also, we had Jeff Kohrman, who's the CISO of eCISO, and Steve Gentry. I would mention your new company, but you're not saying who that is. So I'll just say you're the former CISO at Workfront, and he's going to be a new CISO somewhere else that you're all going to find out about soon enough. I'm David Spark, the producer of CISO Series. Thank you, everybody.
All right, I'd like to give a huge thank you to all of our panelists, our presenters, and thank you so much for taking the time to write and present all these talks. We at NeoCyber really appreciate all of your work with us. I'd also like to thank all of the registrants and the audience members for attending our conference, and so we'll see you all next time.
If you would like to connect with Catherine, myself, the NeoCyber Institute, or even our speakers, if you want to ask more questions, definitely reach out using the emails on the screen. We'd be happy to connect you if you have some more questions. And also remember to follow us on Facebook and LinkedIn, because we will be sharing out this conference material just in case people couldn't stay until the end or they missed some portion of it. And so again, thank you all and enjoy the rest of your Wednesday.